All right, if you need help with the Cellular Respiration Interactive, you came to the right spot. All right, first question, the most important question on any test or assignment is name. So give me the name, your name, give me a last initial so it makes it easier to find you on Aries. Give me the names of your partners who actually helped. So if somebody's over there playing a video game, don't put their name down. I worked with Bob, Jay, and Sally R. All right, number one, every living thing on Earth uses the same molecule for energy, and it's ATP. Adenosine triphosphate, tri because it has three phosphates. Remember, once it uses its energy, it has two phosphates, so it's adenosine diphosphate. Aerobic respiration. Aerobic uses oxygen or O2, uses oxygen gas. Anaerobic does not use oxygen. Anaerobic only makes two ATPs, though, where aerobic will make roughly 32. Where in the cell does the first step of respiration glycolysis occur? It occurs in the cytoplasm of cells, which is just like the fluid outside of organelles within a cell. So, like the nucleus, that's an organelle, mitochondria, chloroplast, lysosomes. So, it's the fluid outside all of those organelles inside of all of our cells. Glycolysis literally means glyco means sugar, lysis means to break. So, it literally means sugar breaking or break sugar. And during glycolysis, we make two of the electron carriers, NADH, and their job is to carry electrons. Now, when they don't have electrons, they're just NAD. And once they pick up electrons and a hydrogen, then they become NADH. And remember, if it's 4 or 5 letters, it does not form a word, it's an electron carrier. Same thing when we get FADH2. How many quote unquote net ATP were created? Well, it took 2 ATP to get glycolysis started, and we got 4 ATP from it. But since we had to spend 2, we really only made 2 ATP. Oh, 2 ATP. During glycolysis, sugar gets broken in half into 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvate, also called pyruvic acid. Glucose gets snapped in half. Glucose, remember, C6H12O6. It gets whoosh, snapped into half into 2 molecules of pyruvate, and we got a little energy, 2 NADHs and 2 ATPs. Where is pyruvate going to move to for what they call in the simulation, the link reaction? I call it pyruvate conversion. It's going to move into the mitochondria. That's plural. Mitochondrion would be singular. And during pyruvate conversion, pyruvate is going to be converted into what's called acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA. And in this process, we broke down, first we broke glucose down into pyruvate. Now we broke it down a little further because acetyl-CoA only has 2 carbons where pyruvate had 3, and we're going to get a little bit more energy out of it. We get 2 more of the electron carriers, NADH, and we make 2 molecules as a waste product, carbon dioxide or CO2. Which stage of respiration does the NADH created go to? Well, which stage is going to need electrons? Because remember, NADH carries electrons. So where are they going to be needed? Obviously, it's going to be needed in the electron transport chain, the fourth and final step in cellular respiration. Because without electrons, it's just going to be a transport chain. You got to have electrons for it to be an electron transport chain. What happens to the CO2 that was created? We breathe it out. Breathe it out into the air. Hey, now a plant can take that CO2 that we just breathed out and boom, turn it back into glucose and is kind of recycled. Which step of respiration does acetyl-CoA go to? It's going to go to the third step called the Krebs, named after Hans Krebs. And if you can invent or discover some cycle in biology, hey, you can name it after yourself. But Hans Krebs named it after himself. It's also called the citric acid cycle. So the Krebs or citric acid cycle. Okay, so here, number 1 in the citric acid cycle. What molecule is created when acetyl-CoA combines with oxaloacetate? Well, the 2-carbon acetyl-CoA combines with a 4-carbon oxaloacetate to form the 6-carbon molecule called citric acid. And that's why it's also called the citric acid cycle instead of just the Krebs cycle. What are the total products of the Krebs cycle? This is going around twice. Remember, we're going to go around twice because we made 2 acetyl-CoAs. And I got to see if I can remember this. We're going to get 4 CO2s, which we breathe out. So now we've made 6, and that's all there is, because remember the formula for respiration makes 6 CO2s. We're also going to get 6 molecules of the electron carrier, NADH. We're going to get 2 molecules of the electron carrier, its buddy, FADH2, also carries electrons to the electron transport chain. And we get a whopping 2 ATP. So now we're up to 4 ATP. We made 2 in glycolysis, 2 more in the Krebs cycle. Where does the NADH and FADH2 go after the Krebs cycle? Well, they carry electrons. Where are electrons needed? Once again, they're needed in the electron transport chain. Because once again, without electrons, it will not be an electron transport chain. Where does the CO2 created go that's created in the Krebs cycle? Well, once again, we breathe it out. So we breathe in oxygen for cellular respiration, and we breathe out CO2 as a waste product. How many ATP are produced in the Krebs cycle? Once again, we got 2 ATP. And the last one, the electron transport chain. Where does it precisely occur? It occurs in the mitochondrion, but it occurs along the inner membrane of mitochondria. The energy of the electrons carried by NADH and FADH2 are used to do what? They are used to pump hydrogen, or H+, those are cat ions. Remember, negatively charged ions are anions. This is a cat ion. But they're used to pump H+ ions outside the inner membrane. So these protein pumps are pumping a bunch of H+ outside that inner membrane. So what's going to do to the concentration gradient? Well, it's going to make a high concentration of H+ outside the inner membrane and low concentration inside. And if we remember from osmosis diffusion, we remember things always want to go from high concentration to low concentration. So those H+ ions are wanting to get moved back inside the inner membrane. And what role does oxygen play in the electron transport chain? So once the electrons reach the end of the chain, well, you can't just have a pile of electrons. They got to go somewhere. And that's why we have to breathe oxygen, because oxygen is the final electron acceptor. So oxygen comes along and says, hey, I'll take those electrons. And it does. It grabs 2 electrons and it grabs a couple hydrogens. And when you have an oxygen with a couple hydrogens, you get H2O, or water. And remember, in cell respiration, we make 6 molecules of H2O. Which enzyme/protein will make ATP? Well, it was the same one we had in photosynthesis in the light-dependent reaction, and it's called ATP synthase. Because it synthesizes or makes ATP, that's why they call it ATP synthase. And the movement of H+ ions through ATP synthase, that would be an example. Remember, if it goes straight through the phospholipids, those balloons and strings, it would be simple diffusion. But since it needs a protein to go through, that would be called facilitated diffusion. All right, so everybody should have all these answers. Make sure all your group members' names are on it and submit. I'll see you guys next week.